Peter Cardwell, presenter and all-round political big brain, is with us. How are you, Peter?
I'm very well, thanks, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Well, I mean, it's worth, I suppose, starting with what... I mean, we talked about the Taliban comment being the big moment, certainly for Rishi Sunak. Some have said it was the moment of the debate, certainly the killer shot, as it were. But there was another one as well. It didn't come from Keir, it didn't come from Rishi. It came from a member of the audience who wasn't trusting either of these guys. Have a listen.
Mr Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
There it is. Very succinct and very powerful question from the audience member, Peter. Fellow audience members love that kind of stuff, don't they? You know, if you can land a bloody nose onto a senior politician, then that's great. This fella did two at once.
That's right. Big round of applause from the audience. And I think a lot of people watching at home will have thought, actually, yeah, fair point. Neither of these leaders inspires great confidence. Neither of them has particularly good approval ratings, terrible approval ratings if you happen to be Rishi Sunak. And even though Labour is very popular, 22 points ahead in the latest poll, Keir Starmer personally does not inspire people. And a lot of people feeling, and there's lots of evidence to suggest, that it's an anti-Tory vote rather than a pro-Labour one necessarily in many people's minds. So yes, there is a lot to talk about in all of this. And certainly the audience member there summing up the mood of many people in the nation.
It was interesting, the political debates. You know this from working on the inside of politics as well, Peter. And I imagine probably like me as a kid, you thought, why don't we do those American debate things like they do in the States? And then in 2010, we gave it a go with Gordon, Dave and Nick, and everyone agreed with Nick. We remember that mantra that was thrown out. And then we didn't see them for a little while. They sort of came back, I think, 2019 when it was Boris versus Corbyn. They did hit the TV studios simultaneously, which I think Theresa May avoided with Corbyn, as I remember. But there was quite a lot of it this year. I mean, they appeared 4 or 5 times together. We had the other debates where we had different reps from different parties. Nothing really ignited for me. I thought it was all quite lacklustre, a lot of kind of pre-prepared press release-like responses and the like, and that's been a big criticism anyway of our MPs, which is why people like Farage seems to have done rather well, because he seems to talk off the cuff. He doesn't do that kind of nicely polished sort of response thing. But actually last night was possibly the liveliest. I think that would be fair.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ian. Rishi Sunak had certainly eaten his Weetabix and was very, very rebarbative and interrupting, really, of Keir Starmer quite a lot of the time. But they took each other to task. And I think if you'd seen maybe a bit more of Rishi Sunak like this earlier in the campaign and indeed over the last 18 months, things might be slightly different for the leader. But I don't think any of these debates really change anything. I actually worked as a producer for the BBC on the very first prime ministerial debate with David Dimbleby back in 2010, and they were very different then. There was actually a man with 3 clocks literally hitting, you know, like if you're playing chess, the sort of chess clocks, like literally hitting, making sure they had exactly the same amount of time. It's not as precise now, and we have a number of those debates with the 7 leaders. Nigel Farage, as you say, the most natural in all of those by a country mile. He certainly, I mean, he even said, I think it was the ITV debate, he said, I'm the only person here who's not reading my final statement from an auto cue because I don't need to. So, I mean, someone like Nigel Farage is very comfortable in that kind of debate. Yes, Starmer and Sunak face off or have faced off against each other at Prime Minister's question time. And no matter what the outcome of the election, it's almost certain they'll do that at least 1 or 2 more times until there's a new leader of the Conservative Party, for example, if there was a Conservative leadership election. But this is a kind of fake thing. It's not something that really exists in politics in this country, these kinds of debates, and a lot of it feels quite manufactured. And I'd be surprised if anything really changes as a result of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know how many people watched the one last night, but I would imagine not as many people as watch EastEnders.
I didn't see any viewing figures, but certainly for Rishi Sunak next Thursday, it could well be a case of
it could well be, yeah. And then Fat Pat turns up and says, "Get out of my pub." No, that's Barbara Windsor, but you take the point.
That's Peggy.
Oh, that's Peggy. I know. Yeah, Let's move on then to a key part of that debate, of course, last night. That was immigration. Here's Rishi Sunak urging voters to not surrender our borders to Labour.
The numbers have come down over the past 12 months compared to the 12 months before. But in order to fully solve this problem, you need a deterrent. We need to make it crystal clear to people that if they come to our country illegally, they won't be able to stay. And that's why, if I'm your Prime Minister on July 5th, the flights will go to Rwanda. We will build that deterrent that multiple other European countries now agree is the right way to deal with this problem. And that's how we solve this problem. If Keir Starmer is your Prime Minister, all those illegal migrants will be out on our streets. And that is the choice for you. Do not surrender our borders to the Labour Party.
There it is. So he felt he was on safe ground, but of course, Peter, the big criticism that will always and completely reasonably be thrown at Rishi Sunak is, hang on, you are the government.
Yeah. Well, I was sitting in Downing Street at the press conference, asked Rishi Sunak a question about it a few weeks ago before the election was called, where he said, you know, no ifs or buts, the flights are taking off for Rwanda. I don't care how many legal challenges there are. I don't care what the European Court of Human Rights says. Those flights are taking off for Rwanda. Well, then he called an election, which actually the net result of that may well be the prevention of any flights taking off for Rwanda. So it is, he certainly has it as part of his election campaign. He says, vote for me and this will happen. It won't happen under Keir Starmer. He's going to change the legislation, make sure it doesn't happen. But at the same time, we are in a situation where a lot of people really care about immigration. There were some reasonable questions from Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer last night saying, what are you going to do? As you referenced at the start of this interview, you know, are you going to negotiate with the Taliban? Are you going to talk to the leaders of Iran, the Ayatollahs, and say you're going to take people back? Those migrants, and especially legitimate asylum seekers, need to go somewhere. Where are they going to go? How are we going to sort this out? How are we going to sort out the processing? And the fact is that probably from both parties, but arguably more from Labour, there is a lack of answers on this. I asked Keir Starmer about this the other day and said, where is the deterrent? Look, Rwanda may not be the world's most popular policy, but it's a deterrent. I said to Keir Starmer, where is the deterrent? He said, smashing the gangs is the deterrent. I'm not sure that stacks up. I'm not sure too many people actually take that with the same...
Well, indeed. I mean smashing the gangs is already kind of... I think that's a given that is an attempt that's already underway.
Rishi Sunak says he's sent over 1,000 gangmasters to prison already with existing legislation, which he points out Labour voted against.
Interesting times. Let's come back to terra firma then. Westminster voting. Westminster betting, I should say. Tory Sir Philip Davis bet £8,000 on himself. It's... to lose his seat, by the way. This is in Shipley. Shipley is famous for two things, HMRC and Philip Davis. Now, what's interesting is that Philip Davis came in, I think, in 2005. I got to know this guy a little bit over the years. I don't think he's fairly straight talking. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But he's managed to find himself winning 3-4 elections over the time in Westminster. But this time it's, he's thinking, maybe I won't. I've got a, 6,200 majority. This might be the time I bow out. So he's put £8,000 on him to lose. And in response, when asked, he said, it's nobody's business. Very typical Philip Davis response, you might say, Peter.
I think it is, but also I think it's probably not a fair response, because I think it is people's business. When he has some agency in this, he is the candidate. There's no suggestion he's done anything illegal per se, but it doesn't look good, and it adds to this scandal, and it seems to be a sort of fairly similar thing to what the Labour candidate who's been criticised on this in the last few days has done. So it'll be interesting to see what Rishi Sunak does. Certainly not as serious as the other candidates who are accused of actually betting on the date of the election. Alistair Jack as well, cabinet minister, put 3 different bets on when the election would be. He won a small amount in one of them, he says. So there's just the police element of this as well rumbles on. 6 police officers involved. One of them has been arrested, others under investigation. It just continues. It's been going on for a couple of weeks now. And when people look back on this election campaign and when they're voting this day week, I don't think too many people will remember necessarily the names of those candidates, exactly their constituencies or all the detail around this, but they'll be left with a feeling about this. They'll be left with a feeling about a few things. I think when people look back on this campaign, they'll remember just a few very small things. 1 is Rishi Sunak being drenched. 2, D-Day. 3, the gambling scandal. And 4, the result, which I think will be dramatic for this country and usher in a huge amount of change. Yeah, I think so. I think you're spot on. And it is just worth saying that when Philip Davis says it's nobody's business, I think spare a thought for all those
party workers in his own constituency who are pounding the streets, giving out leaflets, knocking on doors, saying, no, we've got a really good candidate, you know, we want you to vote for him. And then that candidate suddenly puts a bet on himself losing. I think there's a little bit of a tricky, I think, an apology to those guys.
You're absolutely right, Ian. You're absolutely right. And in all of this, I know I always stand up for people in politics, but I'm going to do it again. In all of this, the vast majority of people who are involved in politics in this country, of whatever shade, of whatever stripe, in whatever party, are volunteers. Yep. The MPs, the people who get paid, the advisors, those are the minority. The vast majority are volunteers who go out, who knock the doors, who put the leaflets through the letterboxes. They must feel particularly demoralised by all of this, and particularly what Sir Philip Davies has said in the last 24 hours.
Indeed. Well, I said this a little earlier. Yesterday we were doing a show about how visual is your wannabe MP. Are you seeing them on the doors? Are you getting the leaflets? Have you spotted them in the town centre? And I made the point that I hadn't had a single leaflet or anything like that. And I got home yesterday, and at about 5 o'clock, I discovered there's 4 leaflets from different parties, 2 from one party, the same leaflet. And then about 6 o'clock, I get a knock on the door. It's almost as if somebody was listening to the show. And it was the guy from the Labour Party, and he said, "Have you got a moment to talk?" And I genuinely didn't. And I said, "I'm really sorry, I haven't." I said, "But thank you for knocking on the door." And he looked really surprised at this. I said, "Genuinely, you're the first person that's done it." And it doesn't matter whether I would support him or not support. The point is, these are volunteers. These are people that are, you know, if you like, engaging in democracy. We said it yesterday. A guy phoned up and said, you know, until you mentioned that, I hadn't thought about it. He rang the party that he's supporting and volunteered to give out leaflets. So he's got 600 to deliver over the weekend. So there you go. It is about engagement.
Well, I think that's great, Ian. And if people can get involved in the political process in some way, there's so much disillusionment. There's so many people who are really annoyed with politics. There's so many people who hate all politicians, the plague in all their houses. Yeah. Well, actually, now's the time, actually. A lot of people have an opportunity. If you feel strongly about one political party, as that person did, give them a ring, help them out, involve yourself in democracy. And even if you can't, if you don't have time or, you know, not the inclination, get out there and vote next Thursday. I don't really care who you vote for. I just make what, you know, people died for a right to vote. There are loads of different countries where we don't have the free speech we have at Talk. We don't have the free speech we have in our media, much flawed as it often is. And often people don't have a right to vote and a right to vote for the people who make the laws in this country. That's why it's incumbent upon all of us who have the vote to go out and use it, even if we write none of the above.
Indeed. Let's move then to this final story. Not good news for the Conservatives. Again, I don't know whether this will penetrate the minds of most people, or whether it will make a difference. But a former Tory donor now has defected to Reform. This is Sir John Hall, former owner of Newcastle United, is now backing Reform. He's at Nigel Farage's rally in County Durham. And, you know, despite his previous support of the Tories, he's now crossed the line, as it were, Peter.
Yeah, he's been on quite a political journey, from someone who gave tens of thousands of pounds to Theresa May's leadership campaign to now supporting Reform UK. And certainly there's a lot of momentum with Reform UK, no pun intended. And they are hoovering up support and donors. They're doing well in the polls. And here we are, another influential person, obviously very well known in the North East, former owner of Newcastle United Football Club, who is supporting Nigel Farage, supporting Reform UK. I'm not sure this will be a massive story of the election necessarily, but very welcome, I'm sure, to many Reform UK supporters, especially as they are basically a political movement that doesn't necessarily have a lot of money, doesn't necessarily have a particularly sophisticated ground game. That's the kind of, I mean, Nigel Farage has said that himself, and to have such a high-profile supporter, they'll be very happy with that.
Indeed. Peter, thank you. Back